Hi, I'm Mark Rosano, founder and CEO of C6 Capital Holdings, coming to you from Primary Vision Network. Today we're going to cover the EIA data and what does it mean, what's going to happen going forward, especially as we have obviously a blizzard coming into the Northeast, and then as those around the country look to prepare for the holiday season. So before we get started, again, we'd like to remind you, please like, share, subscribe. That'd be greatly appreciated. And then we do have our end of year report, so please reach out to learn more. So now as we start to get into it, the crude stock, we had a draw of about 3.14 million barrels, which after last week's big increase of about 15 million, it makes sense to get a little bit of an adjustment, especially as we had imports come down by a little over 1 million barrels a day, and we did have exports normalize closer to what we discussed last week. The bigger issue is going to be now where are we going forward now that we have some slowdown in demand as we progress through the remainder of the year, as people look to maybe quarantine or do a little bit less ahead of potentially seeing family at for the holidays. So you can see right here, where the draws were really created, and again, it was mostly pad 3 and pad 5. Which comes down to that timing delay in terms of when some of those imports came in, as we'll talk about in a few minutes. And then crude production, again, came off about 100,000 barrels, but it's not much in terms of what we've been talking about, where we're expecting about 10.7 to 10.9 on an exit rate. But as we get closer and closer to the end of the year, and for those that watch the Primary Vision Frac Spread show, and as we're getting to that 100, as we're now at 159 spreads, we're getting much closer to holding that 10.9 level versus the 10.7. And then the SPR was just a small adjustment, but it's just in terms of where the movements will be, it'll be fairly minimal coming out of that region. So this is just looking at everything as we look at the inventory. This is including the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. You can see that we're just going sideways at this point as we're in a naturally building period. So after the big increase, now we have a small decline on the oil level, but we did get some builds in the products, which kind of offset some of the benefits that we saw from the draw in oil. Now, as we've been talking about, we were expecting Cushing to kind of just go sideways, just given where the spreads have gone as we look at flow downs from Cushing into the Gulf of Mexico. And now with Brent at about 50.92 and LLS at about 49.44, things are starting to tighten up a little bit, which is going to put pressure on just our exports into specifically Europe. But we've seen some new purchases going into the rest of Asia, mostly being more along the lines of South Korea. So we will get some support from our exports, but again, it'll be fairly minimal in terms of into where the European demand, which again just reverberates back up through the system. So we're expecting Cushing to just continue to go sideways, especially as crude production continues to stay fairly stable, given as we continue to see an increase not only in prices but also in frac spreads. So once we take out the SPR, look at commercial, you can see that we're staying fairly elevated. News seasonally adjusted all-time highs, as we'll probably continue to say as we go through the remainder of the year, because there's not much to see as adjustments. Which leads us to pad 3, which, as you can see, continues to remain elevated across the board, even as floating storage comes down, and we're starting to see a little bit more movement offshore back into onshore, just because we do have the tank capacity. It doesn't make sense to keep it in the water, so we're seeing some of that flow through coming all the way in. Now, the bigger import is the import side. So when we're looking at things that are happening on the crude oil import level, Pad 1, which is the East Coast, had a little bit of an increase. We'll start to see some interesting moves in Pad 1, especially as the blizzard comes through, which is supposed to start at 2 p.m. My time. Now, but the bigger declines were Pad 2, Pad 5. And Pad 3 was a small adjustment, but the bigger ones was coming out of Canada, coming into to the Midwest, and then obviously the timing coming out of Pad 5 or the West Coast. We're just for a pause for a minute, but we have about 33 tankers hauling about 1.3 million tons that have left Europe to come to America so far this month, which again, as we go through, we'll start to talk about some of those imports coming into the U.S., which are starting to slow down just as Europe starts to creep back to some normalcy. some of the imports essentially dry up coming from the Middle East and in Asia. So this is going to slow down some of the imports. But on a crude level, we will see a bounce not only in Pad 2 and Pad 3, but also on Pad 5. Pad 2 and Pad 3 should see a little bit of a bounce as we go into the end of this week and into next week. But you can see that we lost essentially a little over 1 million barrels a day, which is really what caused the drawdown. So when we're looking at exports increasing, import decreasing, that's where we're seeing some of that drawdown, especially because we saw a drop in refinery utilization rates, which fell about 80 basis points, so about 253,000 barrels a day, coming in at 79.1%. Again, our target for the end of this month, is really that 80% level. As we said last week, we could see a little bit of an increase, a little bit of a decrease. Again, it's just kind of finding what is right and where should we sit at this point. You can see that there was a small decline pretty much across the board. Again, as that demand remains a problem heading into the weeks leading up to Christmas. And then as we get into Christmas and people, get in their cars or get on planes, we're starting to see an adjustment again. Not surprising given the rise in COVID cases, that we're seeing a lot of those plans adjust a bit and people either canceling or shrinking the parties or the family members they were planning on seeing, which leads us to the implied demand. So, as we said last week, we expected a spike in gasoline demand because it's always going to come down to timing, especially where we had slowdowns in gasoline demand on the gas buddy side, on the discard side. But again, there was still you still need to maintain a certain amount of normalcy in terms of just keeping the system full. So to see about 375,000 barrels a day moving into the system, again, backfilling, we're still well off the year-over-year 5-year average. So that's something where just given how demand remains weak, we expect that to reverse this week and into next week. Distillate, as we talked about, we had a decent pull-through, which is starting to abate, and we'll talk about that again in section 2 and in part 2. But again, this is something where we're seeing some of that slow down, some of that is normalizing. So this is just one of those pops, and then we'll slow down. Jet fuel, it's going to be that kind of that sideways move, which we'll talk about it again. It's just something where we don't see too much additional jet fuel demand, just given the headwinds that we're seeing within the U.S. and some slowdowns in China. And then propane, again, remains strong. There's nothing to say it's going to move up or down in any meaningful way. We just think it's going to be steady as she goes, especially as we get some of that colder weather in the Northeast and as people are kind of locked in their homes for the next day or two as they weather the storm. Now, as we go into floating storage, it's at 0. Just given what we're seeing, we should see an increase in ships showing up from both Iraq and Saudi Arabia, and it's just going to be a matter of timing of how quickly they can come into the market. As we said, we expected to be below the cloud, with not too much. So this is a calculated number. You have to be stationary for 7 days. So there's stuff out there that's been stationary for 4. So again, as we get into next week, this will move up, but it's not going back to the average. It's just going to stay fairly depressed, just because it's going to marry with what are the refiners doing? What are they running? What kind of product are they trying to create? And that'll just move in terms of, okay, well, how much do we have to pull off the water? So it should stay fairly muted as we head into the end of the year. And again, lining up with Pad 3 imports, same thing as we expected. We were just going to remain well, below that the cloud in terms of just that 5-year average or so, especially the low end, just as we saw refinery utilizations fall a little bit, things continue to remain fairly depressed, which is why we just are going to bounce around beneath that level, especially as we maintain throughput at 79 to 80% as we go through the remainder of the year. Pad 2, as we were saying, we thought we were going to have a big drop and it was going to fall closer to the 5-year average. Clearly, it went through that. So, again, this is always going to be a timing issue. And as you can see, there's those ups and downs. So now we're expecting that to bounce back up. It'll bounce back, just above that 5-year average. But again, it's just going to come down to marrying with what are the refiners doing, what are they trying to create, and there will be that spike. But again, it's just going to be a timing delay overall. And then as we get into the refinery utilization rates, this is where you can see that we normally get a nice little spike after Thanksgiving. Then we start to fall back down and then really kind of flatline as we head into the end of the year with a small increase into the end of December as we prepare for the meat of the winter, which is January, February, and then depending on what March looks like. So typically, we get maximum runs within the U.S. between the end of December, January, till about the first to second week of February, and then we normally see some turnarounds start at the end of February into March, and then as we go through March and April, which is kind of that core shoulder season or that slowdown, then we start to see those ramp ups as we prepare for summer driving. Again, these are things that continue to be depressed, and which is just hurting inherent oil demand in the U.S. There's really nothing to say that that's going to adjust, especially as we had even at depressed refinery utilization rates and an increase in exports for some of the refined products. We're still seeing builds. We're still seeing the slowdown in demand, which is just going to weigh on refinery utilization rates, which inherently is oil demand in the U.S. And so, with that remaining depressed, we think that that's going to be an inherent problem, especially as we head into Q1, as some of these adjustments are made with OPEC coming back, which we'll talk about in our OPEC show. And just what does it mean, and what are we expecting for refined product demand of the products as we head into year end, which we'll cover in the second segment.